How's it everyone who's watching this? This is my 22nd video on the channel, and today we're going to be looking at the 9th chapter of Bruce Fink's book, The Lacanian Subject, titled The Four Discourses. Last time, we finished this chapter on sexuation. There's no such thing as a sexual relationship. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on the role of discourse in Lacanian psychoanalysis. This chapter is made up of 6 subchapters. Firstly, there's the Master's Discourse, then the University Discourse, followed by the Hysteric Discourse, the Analyst Discourse, and the Social Situation of Psychoanalysis, ending finally, but not at all leastly, on There's No Such Thing as a Metalanguage. Before we start, discourse in Lacanian psychoanalysis refers to points where language and speech intersect. In other words, to what facilitates social bonds between individuals. Fink begins the chapter by saying that, despite some people's attempts, Lacanian psychoanalysis is not a totalized worldview. Instead, it's just one discourse amongst many. The question that this gives rise to is why we should prioritize it. In Fink's words,
why should we bother to concern ourselves with analytic discourse at all, if it is just one of several or one of many?
His answer is that psychoanalysis allows us to understand the functioning of different discourses in unique ways. Before he gets into the particulars of that, though, Fink seeks to make clear that individuals don't always exist in one discourse. For example, one of Lacan's discourses is termed the hysterics, but that doesn't mean that a given hysteric is inescapably bound to it. As an analyst, the hysteric may function in the analytic discourse, as an academic, the university discourse. Yet, this also isn't to say that discourses are like different hats to put on. As he says,
the changing of discourses generally requires that certain conditions be met.
These conditions will be what he goes over in the following sections, starting with the Master's Discourse. In a way, this discourse holds a privileged position amongst the four, all others ultimately deriving from it. In order to visualize it, Fink offers this diagram. To unpack what's happening here, S1, termed a master signifier and identified by being nonsensical and devoid of any meaning by itself, takes the dominant position. Not because there's some rational reason to obey it, but simply because it declares it to be so. Much like S1 itself, there's no sense to it. Its power just, is. This master addresses the slave, represented here as S2, as shown with the arrow, instructing it to work away. Through the process, the slave learns something. It comes to embody knowledge. This knowledge is of no concern to the master, however, since all it cares about is whether or not its power is maintained. To give a more concrete example of this discourse in action, think of the worker and the capitalist. The capitalist takes the role of S1, the master, whereas the worker takes the role of S2, the slave. The worker produces something as directed by the capitalist. Surplus value, represented by A or objet petit A, the cause of desire in the diagram. Then, as Fink says,
that surplus, deriving from the activity of the worker, is appropriated by the capitalist, and we might suppose that it procures the latter enjoyment of some kind, surplus jouissance.
The last element of a table is the barred S. This is placed under S1 to demonstrate that the master must show no weakness. It can't reveal that it too is castrated by language. In other words, forced to give up some of its jouissance, its pleasure, as to do so would unveil the master as no different from the slave. This bar is thus the truth of discourse. Concealed may it be. Going over the structure of the discourses as a whole, Fink supplies this diagram. To quickly recap, the agent of the master's discourse is, as the name suggests, the master. It addresses another, the slave, which produces something that is experienced as a loss, objet petit A. Throughout the entire discourse, the truth of a master's identity as castrated is hidden. This basic setup, agent, other, product, truth, is the same for all discourses. As Fink states of them, they are
generated from the first by rotating each element counterclockwise 1/4 of a turn, or revolution.
The first of these modified discourses is that of academia, leading us into the next subchapter called the University Discourse. He begins with a short quote from Lacan, Seminar 8, which sets the tone for the section.
For centuries, knowledge has been pursued as a defense against truth.
This is demonstrated using another diagram. Here, instead of the master signifier acting as the agent, is rather the embodiment of knowledge, represented by S2. Systematic knowledge is the ultimate authority, and everything surrounds reason and rationality. However, the master still has its power, shown by Lacan by positioning it in the spot dedicated to truth. For him, the University Discourse acts almost to legitimize the master's will, acting as an arm of capitalist production. Here, what's interrogated is not the slave, but surplus value. The discourse acts to justify and rationalize it, producing in the process the alienated or barred subject. Ending the subchapter, Fink states,
Working in the service of the master signifier, more or less any kind of argument will do, as long as it takes on the guise of reason and rationality.
This brings us to the third section of the chapter, titled the Hysterics Discourse. This is technically the fourth discourse, if we're going by quarter turns, but regardless, Fink places it here to emphasize its opposition to the University Discourse. He starts out with yet another diagram. What's happening here is that the split subject takes the position of the agent, addressing and questioning the power of the master signifier. As Fink says it,
the hysteric goes at the master and demands that he or she shows his or her stuff, prove his or her mettle by producing something serious by way of knowledge.
We find this knowledge, represented by S2, in the spot dedicated not only to just what is produced or lost as we went over earlier, but also where Lacan positions jouissance. Knowledge is essentially eroticized in the Hysterics Discourse, treated as a source of pleasure or excitement. This is in contrast to both the master and university discourses. In the first, knowledge remains unimportant to the agent, S1, and is only valued insofar as it can be used to produce something else. At the end of the day, knowledge is left inaccessible to the master. In the second, it also isn't really treated as an end in itself. Knowledge's sole purpose is to legitimize the university's discourse, justifying the academic's existence. It's because of this unique relationship with knowledge that Lacan associates science not with the academic discourse, which, instead of seeking to grasp the real, simply acts to exhaust a field, but with that of the hysteric. To examine this relationship between hysteria and science, Fink instructs us to look at Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
In simple terms, it states that we cannot precisely know both a particle's position and its momentum at the same time.
Such a principle may, at first glance, appear quite startling, he says. We often imagine scientists as these people who relentlessly work on refining their instruments so that they can measure everything. Yet, as Heisenberg demonstrates, there's a limit. Not everything is measurable, and as such, not everything can be known to science. Schematizing then all of science as a set, perhaps an expanding one or else an ideal one composed of all discoveries both past and future, Heisenberg can be understood as saying that it's necessarily incomplete. It contains an unfillable hole. This closely mirrors Lacan's understanding of the hysteric.
The hysteric pushes the master, incarnated in a partner, teacher, or whomever, to the point where he or she can find the master's knowledge lacking.
Hysterics basically demand that the master supply them with knowledge, then go on to disprove their theories. It's for this reason that they themselves historically were who acted as the true force behind the elaboration of medical, psychiatric, and psychoanalytic understandings of hysteria. Going all the way back to the father of psychoanalysis,
Hysterics led Freud to develop psychoanalytic theory and practice, all the while proving to him in his consulting room the inadequacy of his knowledge and know-how.
Ending the subchapter, Fink looks at the last part of Hysteric's discourse, the position of truth, occupied by objet petit a. In this case, what Lacan means here is that the real is the discourse's truth. It's full of paradoxes and contradictions, like the full set that cannot be fulfilled, and these command it forward. Unlike the Master's Discourse, which seeks to hide its truth, the Hysteric's discourse takes it to its end. Those paradoxes and contradictions are taken as far as they can go. With that, we arrive at the last discourse, that of psychoanalysis. Fink begins this next subchapter, titled fittingly The Analyst Discourse, by stating that the objet petit a, acting in its usual role as the cause of desire, occupies the agent position, whereas the other is played by the barred subject. In the analytic situation, the analyst then can be said to take on the role of a blank slate of desire, interrogating the analysand subject in its division, precisely as Fink says,
at those points where the split between conscious and unconscious show through, slips of the tongue, bungled and unintended acts, slurred speech, dreams, etc.
In the process, the subject reveals, or produces as it were, a master signifier that hasn't yet been connected to anything else. As I said previously, this master signifier means nothing by itself. It's nonsensical. In analysis, this manifests as a dead end that brings free association to a halt. But by identifying it, however, analysis is able to continue through putting that S1 in relation to other signifiers. Moving on, Fink says that, according to Lacan, the analysand inevitably becomes hystericized through the course of analysis as a result of the analyst taking up the analytic discourse. It doesn't matter what clinical structure the analysand has, be it phobic, perverse, or obsessive-compulsive, at the end of the day, they end up back into the hysteric's discourse. This results because, in Fink's words,
the analyst puts the subject as divided, as self-contradictory, on the firing line, so to speak.
The analyst focuses on nothing else except the split between the conscious and the unconscious. With this, we move quickly along to the last section of the whole chapter, titled There's No Such Thing as a Metalanguage, skipping over the penultimate one, since it deals mostly with just some particulars about power struggles between Lacanian institutions in Paris. Here, he ends by stating, as the name suggests, that there doesn't exist a meta-discourse that escapes the limits of the four we've just gone over. The beauty in psychoanalysis isn't that it somehow provides an outside view of discourse, but rather that it elucidates the structure of discourse itself from the inside. Now, this concludes the chapter on the 4 discourses from Bruce Fink's book, The Lacanian Subject. I truly hope you enjoyed or at least learned something. If you feel I got anything wrong or wasn't as clear as I could have been, please do feel free to let me know in the comments so I can do better. Next time, we'll be looking at the last chapter of the work, Chapter 10, titled Psychoanalysis and Science. Until then, bye!